The rain came in sideways off the sea, and by the time the coach slewed into the yard at Rackmouth, the last daylight had drowned in it. Sorrel climbed down into a courtyard of noise and lantern smoke, her heart already in her throat. She had ridden all day with her hood up, watching the road behind them. Standing now in the muck, while her one small box came down, she made herself breathe. One night here, one morning across the moor, and the gates of Ravenglass would shut behind her, and she would be nobody at all. A hired still-room woman at the coldest house in the north, the sort the world forgets it has met. Then a man turned in the door of the tap-room, knocking the wet from his hat. The lantern found his face, and every plan she owned went out like a pinched candle. Skene, Crome's man, the lean one with the patient eyes. He had not seen her yet, stamping his boots, cursing the road. But the yard was small, and the light lay full on her, and in a moment he would look up, and 2 months of running would end before it began. She had one breath, and no plan inside it. What her body chose, it chose without asking her. She turned to the man nearest her under the arch, a tall stranger in a black coat, a wall of shoulder and shadow, took a fistful of his lapel, rose on her toes, and kissed him. She kissed him the way a woman kisses someone she has crossed a county to reach, to press her face out of the lamplight into his shoulder, to make herself no one, a shape the eye slides over and forgets. He went, still, a stillness so complete, it frightened her more than her own daring had. For one instant, she was sure he would fling her off, and the yard would swing round to stare. Instead, a hand came to rest between her shoulder blades, light as a bird settling, and drew her half a step in out of the rain. His body turned until it stood square between her and the yard. He did not kiss her back. He sheltered her, a screen against a danger he could not name, on no evidence but that she was small and shaking and had come to him. Past the black wool of his sleeve, she watched Skene rake the yard with those patient eyes, pass his glance across a husband and wife in an archway, and go grumbling into his supper. Sorrel came down off her toes, her hand still knotted in his coat, and raised her eyes to the man she had kissed. The apology withered on her tongue. He was 30, perhaps, dark hair wet at the brow, a hard, shut, handsome face, all edges, but it was the eyes that undid her. A gray so pale they seemed lit from behind, fixed on her with a look between disbelief and a slow, startled thaw, as though she had struck a flame in a room dark a very long time. "Madam," he said low. His quietness was worse than any shout. "I fear you have the advantage of me." And then the yard tore open behind them with a scream. Not a woman. A horse, the near leader of the mail, maddened by thunder rearing in the traces, and under its hooves a boy, one of the ragged post lads gone down beneath the wheel, making a sound that went past the ears and lodged under the ribs. Sorrel was already out from under his hand, across the yard and on her knees in the filth before the men had done shouting. "Still, all of you," she said in a voice that cut the panic clean in two. "Give him air and the lantern." Something in it was obeyed before it could be argued with. The men gave back a pace. A light came down. The boy's leg was broken. She saw the wrongness at a glance, but the leg would not be the danger. The danger was the wound high on his leg, losing too much too fast, and Sorrel did not stop to be faint, or ladylike, or anything but her father's daughter. She pressed both hands hard to it to stem the flow, and bound the ribbon from her own throat tight above the hurt. "Your neckcloth," she said over her shoulder. "To no one, to the rain. The tall one now, if you please." And the most feared man in England went down on one knee in the mud beside a stranger who had kissed him, unwound the black silk from his throat, and laid it in her open hand without a word. She worked a quarter hour in the rain. When she stood at last, the boy was gray and shaking, but breathing. The bleeding stopped. His life. His to keep if the bone were set before dawn. She gave the last orders, a door for a litter, a hot brick, no brandy, and stepped back, and found her knees had begun very quietly to knock. The stranger had not stirred from the arch. He had watched all of it with the same unreachable stillness. Now the landlord was bent at his ear, scraping, gray as tallow, saying, "Your grace and your grace," until the words were smooth. Something dropped in Sorrel's chest. "Your grace," she said. "So they insist." No warmth reached the pale eyes. "Corwin Ash, though. I imagine you have heard the shorter name the country keeps for me." She had. Holla. Every soul from the border to the sea had. The Duke of Wintermarch, the man it was murmured, never to his face, had walked his own young brother to the tide race, one black autumn night, and come back up the cliff path alone. The most feared man in England, whom no servant would serve a season, the one she had just kissed in an open yard to save her neck. "You are for the moor," he said, not asking. He had read the direction chalked on her box. "For Ravenglass." The woman, "My grandmother sent north for." His glance moved over the wreck of her and did not soften. "Halden will find you a place at first light," he said, and turned for the door, then paused and said over his shoulder to the gray old man behind him, so softly. The softness became the loudest thing in the yard. "She will be gone inside the week, Halden. They always are. See, she is paid to the day when she runs." And he went in out of the rain. Halden did not answer. He had kept the house 40 years and never once seen a living soul walk up to the Duke of Wintermarch and lay hands on him, nor, since the sea took Lord Cassian, seen the Duke suffer any person to touch him at all. He folded the thought away where he kept such things, and went to carry the young woman's box himself. Sorrel had come north to disappear into Ravenglass, and she had told the dowager only the half of her story that would buy her the door. In her letters she had called herself a physician's daughter, orphaned young, without means, raised in her father's craft and obliged to earn her bread, none of it a lie. She had signed them Miss Wren, which was not her name, trusting so plain a word to sink without a ripple. The lie was only in what she left out. Her name was Sorrel Frayne. Her father, Dr. K. Alias Frayne, had died 2 winters back and left her more than a girl in her place could safely hold. £3,000 tied up in trust until she married or turned 25, whichever came sooner. The trustee he had chosen to keep her safe was his wife's own brother, Mr. Hollis Crome, and Crome had a son, Aldous, damp, soft-handed, grasping, and an arithmetic of his own. Marry Aldous. And the money never left the Crome house, where a good part of it had already quietly seeped away. She had refused him at Michaelmas, and gone before first light with a borrowed cloak. 11 shillings and the small brass pestle that was the one thing of her father's she would never sell. 2 years and a little over stood between her and the morning. The money and she herself came loose of every hand that grasped at it. 2 years to be no one. She had been very nearly no one all her life already. The girl in the sick room who ground the powders and was never presented. The one a drawing room looked clean past on its way to someone brighter. Going unseen was the single craft, saving medicine, she had ever truly mastered. She had not reckoned on Ravenglass, nor certainly on kissing its master in an inn-yard before she had so much as seen his roof. Ravenglass Hall stood where the moor ran out of land, on a shoulder of black rock above the sea, and it was dying, and it took Sorrel 3 days to see how. It was a beautiful thing, which was the worst of it, a long, low, weather-dark house grown up out of its own cliff, built to outlast 1,000 winters, and plainly meaning to. But the county had settled it among themselves, 5 autumns back, that a murder had been done inside those walls, and a county that believes such a thing simply stops coming. No carriage had turned in at the gates in years. No girl from the fishing towns would take a place there for any wage. The house was kept by the handful too old or too stubborn to leave, and it was failing from the middle outward, the way a great tree rots at the core while its leaves still come out green. The plate had gone black in its drawers. Whole rooms stood shuttered under dust sheets, breathing damp. and the damp meant a roof opened somewhere over the north wing that no one had climbed up to find. The kitchen chimney drew so ill that Mrs. Tonded, Danby the cook, spent half her day in smoke, and cried over a fish come up from the town already turned that could not be sent back. "Mr. Vosper settles with the tradesmen," she said, twisting her apron, "and Mr. Vosper is not to be spoken to." "And who," Sorrel asked, "is Mr. Vosper?" "The agent, the steward." He had been the estate's agent some years already, when Lord Cassian drowned. And in the 12-month after, the old housekeeper died, and no new one was ever named, and ever since, Mr. Vosper had held every key and every account, and answered to not one living soul, because the one man who might have called him to account had shut himself away with his grief, and would set his name to anything sooner than read it. There was no mistress at Ravenglass, and had been none for 5 years. And out in the stable yard, chained short to a ring in the wall, there was a dog, a huge grey deerhound, grizzled now about the muzzle, who had been Lord Cassian's and who, since his master went into the sea, would let no hand come near him. He hurled himself the length of his chain at anything that crossed the cobbles. Twice the steward had ordered him shot, twice the dowager had forbidden it from her chair, and so the animal lived on, half-starved and hated, a thing the whole house feared, and no one would go near, which was, Sorrel thought from a careful distance, very much the way the house spoke of its master. She said none of this aloud. She had come here to be no one. She learned the names, folded her hands, and held her tongue. It held until the 3rd afternoon. The Dowager Duchess of Wintermarch was named Almira, and she was 81, and nothing in that house got past her. She kept to a small south sitting room, the one warm room under that whole cold roof, upright in her chair as a drawn sword, wrapped in a shawl the grey of a gull's wing, her hands gone to knots and her eyes nowhere at all. Sorrel was brought in the first afternoon, and looked over for the better part of a minute, in a silence most women would have rushed to fill. Sorrel let it stand. "You are smaller than I was," promised the old woman said at last, "and a good deal more use, I expect. My grandson sends word. He does not write letters. He has them written that you kissed him in an inn-yard, kept a boy from bleeding to death under a coach, and gave him instruction touching his own neck linen, and all of it before you had his name. Is it true? The boy will keep his leg, ma'am. That is not what I asked, but it will do." Something bright shifted behind the old eyes. "Nothing has surprised my grandson in 5 years. He does not care for it. It takes the ground from under him." She let the words settle. "You have seen the dog in the yard?" "Yes, ma'am." "That dog was Cassian's, my younger grandson." The sharpness went out of her face, and something far older came up into it. "He was 24, and the warmth of this house, the one who laughed, who knew every tenant's child by name, who kept the whole place breathing while his brother saw to the land. One night 5 autumns ago he fell out with Corwin at supper, over some nothing neither of them could afterward have named, and walked down to the water in the dark, and the tide took him, and they carried him up off the rocks at first light." Her ruined hands lay still. "The country has improved on the tale since. It prefers one with a villain in it. It says, 'My elder grandson followed his brother down to that water, and lent the sea a hand, for the title, for money, for whatever a small mind can stitch together out of nothing. There was an inquest. It found nothing, because there was nothing to find. It shifted not one dinner table in the district. They hanged Corwin in their hearts on a whisper, and they have kept him hanging these 5 years." Sorrel said nothing. She had learned young that grief has no use for a stranger bearing tidy words. "And so my elder grandson," Almira went on, in a voice pressed flat, "who did not drown his brother, but who will go to his grave, never forgiving himself the last hard word he gave him, has not set foot in the north wing since, nor spoken Cassian's name, nor let his eye rest on a single thing in this house that wants doing. For everything that wants doing was his brother's. And into that open door walked a soft-spoken man with a ring of keys. She turned her head. I cannot prove a farthing against him. I am 81. I cannot climb to the north wing to count slates off a roof, and Vosper knows to the day how old I am. But I have felt this house being bled, the way you feel a draft in a shut room and cannot find the crack that lets it in. You are going to find me the crack. Quietly, she added. To every eye under this roof you will be nothing but my companion. You will read to me of an afternoon and fetch my shawl, and be the kind of harmless nobody a busy thief never thinks to watch. That is your whole worth to me, child. No one has ever counted you worth the watching. Neither did I, until my grandson forgot to be bored by you. Begin with the still room and the kitchen books. They are beneath Vosper's notice, which is the very reason they will tell you the truth. Your Grace, I was hired to boil cordials. You were hired because I am old and wanted a pair of eyes I could trust, and it has cost me 3 companions and 4 winters to find them. Do not waste my time being modest. I have none left to spare. The bright gaze pinned her. My grandson told his butler you would be gone inside the week, did he not? He did, ma'am. Something that on a younger face would have been a grin crossed the old one. Then you have 5 days to make a liar of him. I should not squander them. Sorrel used the 5 days. The house did not believe in her, and said so the way houses do, below stairs, behind her back. By the close of her first week a book was running in the servants' hall. A shilling said the new woman would be gone back over the moor by Candlemas, worn thin like the ones before her by the cold rooms, the shut-up master, and the soft-spoken steward who ruled them both. The money lay heavy against her. Even little Nessa, from the scullery who, like her, had put 6pence on a month. She knew of the wager inside 3 days. For a woman who has spent her life unnoticed, hears much that louder people let slip past. She did not hold it against them. She would have laid the same bet herself, the morning she signed a false name to a letter, and came north with 11 shillings and a pestle. She had no thought of winning them with words. She had never talked a soul round to anything. She meant to make herself needful, so quietly no one could afterward name the day it happened until the house could not remember running without her, and the wager went cold for want of a question worth asking. She gave no order she had not been given, corrected no one, reminded no one that the dowager's word stood behind her. She took up, one by one, the jobs the whole house stepped around, and let the doing speak for her. She began there because no house that leaves a starving animal to scream on a chain in its own yard is trying very hard to live, and she meant to make this one try. She did not go at him. Each morning she carried her breakfast to a pail, just beyond the reach of his chain, sat, ate, and never turned her face his way. For a terrified creature is not won by being stared down, but by your becoming, slowly, the dullest thing in its world, too tiresome to be worth the fear. She left a little meat in the cold, and went in. On the 9th morning, the great grey hound came to the end of his chain, and lay down with a sound that seemed to come up from under the yard, and set his scarred head against her knee. In the loft, the grooms watched, mouths open. She unhooked the chain that afternoon, and the dog Fen, his name had been, followed at her heel into the house, like something walking out of a long sleep, lay down across the still-room door, and was hers from that hour. The kitchen whispered witchcraft. Old Jory, the head groom, who had not willingly spoken since the young lord died, brought the animal a bone off the spit, as near an oration as Jory ever came. Then she took the rest of it, one room at a time. She went to the still room first, because if you would know the truth of a house you look first, where it keeps its small honesties. This one had gone to rack. She turned out 3 years of furred jam and weevilled flour, and at the back found a run of shelves some careful hand had kept, little pots in even rows, each labeled in a round, patient script, all spoiled now, untouched since the winter Mrs. Wunscher. Aldrich, the last housekeeper, died, and the caring went into the ground with her. She scrubbed each pot and kept the labels. It seemed a mean economy to scrape off a dead woman's writing only to spare herself fresh paper. She had the maid strip every linen press and wash and turn and mend the whole of it, cutting down for bandages what had rotted past saving. She had the chimney swept, which cost 9d, and ended a year of smoke in an afternoon. She sent the turned fish back to Rackmouth with a note in her own hand, courteous and not to be argued with, and the next came up sweet. She dosed the laundrymaid's whitlow, Jory's ruined shoulder, the old butler's aching knees, and the word went out along the moor that there was a woman at the Black House with a healer in her hands, and one by one the sick came to the kitchen door no one had knocked upon since the drowning. And she began, without a word to a living person, to keep the kitchen book herself. It was a humble thing, a cook's tally, what came in at the door and what was paid for it, week by week, as far as the dowager's leave reached. But you cannot touch one corner of a house without the rest stirring in answer. And a narrow window still shows the weather coming in. So she set down, in plain figures, what the butcher was truly paid, and the fishmonger, and the chandler, and the corn factor, the sums the tradesman counted into her hand at the door. And inside a fortnight her figures and the house's figures had ceased to agree. The butcher was paid 12 shillings a week. He said so himself, and showed her the notched stick he kept to prove it. But when the quarter's kitchen reckoning went up on the board, as Mr. Vosper posted it for the look of the thing, the butcher's line stood at 18. 6 shillings a week off one tradesman, walking clean out of the house into no name at all. Sorrel stood in the cold passage a long while, studied the posted sheet, did not touch it, and said not a word to anyone. She had grown up in a house where sorrow made one man loud and taught everyone else to move softly, and she had kept her father's books from the age of 12, and learned there the one thing she never let go of, that a column of figures does not care in the least whether you are little or plain or a woman. Figures cannot be charmed, nor bullied, nor wept at. They are only right or wrong, and mind not at all which of the two you are. They asked nothing of her but to be correct. She was correct about the 6 shillings. And that was the misery of being right. It lodged in her like a swallowed pin, and would not be reasoned out however firmly she told herself to let it alone. The Duke came to notice her the way a man notices the ache has gone at last out of an old wound, not all at once and never quite meaning to. He never went near the kitchen or still-room. Those were the far side of the moon to him, but he could not help marking that the chimney no longer smoked over his breakfast, that his coffee reached him hot, that his dead brother's savage dog now beat its tail at a certain light step in the passage. And one evening he came down to the long table where he supped alone and found the second place gone. For 5 years 2 covers had been laid at that table, an order given in the first blind week of mourning and never taken back, so the master of Ravenglass supped each evening across from the empty chair of a drowned man. Now there was one place only, the other carried quietly away. "Who moved it?" he asked Halden. "Miss Wren, your grace. She thought a man might sup easier without a ghost laid a place at his own board." A pause. "Shall I have it set again?" The Duke looked at the single cover a long moment. "Leave it," he said. He came upon her 3 days after in the long gallery by chance, the only way he came upon anyone that year. She had a basket of mended linen on her hip and a smear of beeswax on her wrist, and stepped to the wall to let him by eyes down as a servant's should be. He went past her, then halted. "You are the woman from the yard," he said. "The one who kissed a man the whole country calls a murderer, sooner than let it see her face." She raised her eyes to him. "I don't believe it was a murderer I kissed, your grace." It was not the reply he had braced for. Nothing about her ever was. He looked at her properly now, in the daylight, small and quiet and plain, the sort of face a ballroom slides past on its way to a handsomer one. But when she lifted those gray eyes, They were level and clear and held not one grain of fear, and no living creature had looked at him so in 5 years. His servants studied the floor. The county turned away. His own grandmother looked straight through him. This woman looked at him as though he were only a man who had asked a question she could answer and was weighing how much of it he could bear. He had forgotten until that moment what it was to be looked at. "You would do well to fear me," he said. "The rest of the world has the wit to." "I have had my 2 hands inside the things people are truly afraid of, Your Grace," she said. "I know their weight. You are not one." And she curtsied, took up her basket, and went on down the gallery, and never saw him stand a full minute where she had left him, unable to name what he felt, save that for one breath Ravenglass had not felt like a place where something lay buried. Sorrel felt it too, going away with her pulse quicker than she cared for, and mistrusted it, for in the same breath she was thinking of the butcher's 6 shillings, the roof open over the north wing, the 2 years and £3,000 shot in Holliscrome's strongbox. "There is a good man going under in there," she thought, "and hard upon it, and he is no affair of yours. You came to disappear, not to drag a drowning duke out of his own well." She very nearly believed it. Let's stop there a moment. If you want to see how far this small, quiet woman is about to go, and the best of it is still ahead, take a second to subscribe before we carry on. Now, back to Ravenglass. The trouble was that the more of the house they let her see, the worse the thing rotting under it looked, and it was very nearly done hiding. Sorrel's leave from the Dowager carried her, in the end, further than the Dowager had ever meant it to. It was store-taking that took her there. The great store press stood at the cold end of the north passage, where the estate office shared the same wall, and a connecting door always kept locked. But one gray forenoon, Mr. Vosper had ridden into Rackmouth for the quarter's sessions, and the door between stood, for once, ajar. She told herself she had come only to count linen. She stood in the office doorway and looked at the shelf of ledgers, and the thing that stopped her cold was plain arithmetic. There were 2 books for the running year, where there should have been 1. 2 rent rolls, bound as lank as brothers in the same brown calf, but one thumbed soft at the corners with much handling, the other clean as the day it was stitched. She had no business touching them. She touched them anyway, and opened the clean one first. It was the book kept for showing. Rents in, sums neat, the estate poor but honest, every tenant paid to the day, every repair set down and settled. The roof over the north wing, she read, had been made good last autumn at a cost of £40. She had stood under that roof not a week since, catching the rain off it in a pail. She opened a thumbed one, and her stomach turned over because the thumbed one was the truth. Here the rents came in higher than the clean book would own. A shilling wrung out of this widow, 2 out of that shepherd, and not a penny of it carried into the book that was shown. Here were repairs charged that no hand had ever made. Here were tradesmen's bills entered, as paid at one figure, and settled at another, and lower, week upon week, the difference running off the foot of every page and out of the house into nobody's name at all. Sorrel stood in the failing light, and did the sum, and the sum was 5 years long. This was no footman lifting spoons. This was a patient man draining a great house drop by drop in a fair clerkly hand, while its master sat upstairs with his grief, and could not be brought to open one book his brother's fingers had touched. She heard the outer door. There was no time to think. She set the thumbed book back exactly as it had lain, square to its fellow, and she was 3 paces into the store press with a slate in her hand, counting sheets aloud, when Mr. Red. Vosper came in off the road with the wet still on his shoulders. He was a soft, round-faced, agreeable man of 40, and he smiled a great deal. He smiled now. "Miss Wren, in my office. In your store press, Mr. Vosper." She did not look up from the slate. "Her Grace has set me to count the linen. 14 pair of sheets, and 9 of them whole. It makes a poor showing. You keep a great many tallies, he said, for a woman hired to boil cordials. Her Grace likes me kept busy. Her Grace, said Mr. Vosper gently, still smiling, is 81. She will not always be here to keep you so. He came a step nearer, light on his feet for a heavy man. A word between servants, Miss Wren. This is an old house, and a lonely one, with a deal of cold water at the foot of its cliff. A young woman with no people to miss her, and you have none, have you? Does best to keep to her still room and ask no questions that can do her no good. Girls come to Ravenglass, and Ravenglass wears them thin and they go. I should be sorry to see you worn out before your time. The smile never slipped, but Sorrel set down her slate and met his eyes, level and gray and without a tremor, and for half a heartbeat she saw the thing that lived beneath the smile, plain as a coin turned over. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. He had come in smiling to put the fear into her, and it was his own fear that had walked him through the door, because a woman with a slate and a head for figures had been standing too near his open office. A man who has built his whole quiet business on there being nobody in the house, who counts or reads or writes a thing down, does not sleep easy when exactly such a person lodges under his roof. I keep careful books, Mr. Hallis. Vosper, she said pleasantly, it is the one thing I do that no one has ever asked me to leave off. Good day to you. She walked out past him with her slate, her hands held steady the length of the passage and round the turn of the stair, and only there, in the dark of the half-landing, did they begin at last to shake, for she understood, gripping the cold rail, that she had just made an enemy of the one man in that county, saving Hollis Crome, who had it in his power to undo her altogether. She did not go to the Duke. She turned it over the better part of a week, and still she did not go, and she was honest enough to name the reason. Fear. To carry this to Corwin Ash was to be looked at, and to be looked at was to be asked who she was, and where her people were, and what her name had been before. It was Wren, and behind that name stood Hollis Crome, and £3,000, and a wedding she had run the length of the country to escape. A cordial maker who crossed the Stewart would be turned off without a character, and a woman turned off got talked of, and a woman talked of got found. Better to keep her head down 2 more winters and let a rich man's house go on robbing itself. It was not her house. It was not her quarrel. She had nearly talked herself round it, when they sent her down the moor to a sick child at Marrow End. The child was a boy of 5 called Robin. His mother, the widow Alice Kemp, looked twice her true age. Sorrel sat by the cot 2 hours and brought the fever down. And the whole while she sat there, the rain came steady through the thatch into a pot a yard from the child's pillow, drop upon patient drop. The widow never complained of it. The rent had gone up at the term, she said, though nothing under heaven had been done to earn the rise. Mr. Vosper says his Grace has need of it, and his Grace is a poor grieving gentleman that buried his brother, so I'll not begrudge it. Only I do wonder the roof's not mended, that we were charged. The mending of 2 winters back, but I'd not trouble his Grace over a bucket. Sorrel stood in the doorway with the sleeping child behind her, and looked at a woman who would not trouble anyone, and the shame of it went through her like cold water, for there it was laid open. Vosper had never needed cleverness, only patience, and other people's goodness to build on. A master too broken to look, tenants too tender of a grieving man to knock at his door, a still-room woman too frightened for her own skin to speak. Every soul in the chain was behaving well, and a house full of decent, frightened, sorrowing people can be emptied to the bare walls and never once cry out until one of them decides to stop being safe. She walked back over the moor with Fen at her heel, and somewhere on that gray mile she settled it. She could not go with a rumor. He would not believe her. Or Vosper would name her hysteric with a grievance, and have her gone by the week's end, and gone meant found. She needed the thing itself, the true book beside the false, the tenant's own words. a case so whole no smile on earth could laugh it into air. She had 2 winters of hiding left to spend, and was about to lay the whole of it down in a single season. She built her case the way she kept her books, quietly, in her own hand, a shilling of proof at a time. The spring came on while she built it. On the honest pretext of settling the kitchen accounts herself, she gathered the tradesman's own reckonings, the butcher's notched stick, the chandler's daybook, the corn factor's scrawled receipts, and copied every figure clean. She got Alice Kemp and 2 other tenants to set their marks to a plain statement of what rent they truly paid and what mending they had truly had, which was none. She could not get into the office again. Vosper kept it locked and half an eye on her besides. But she had no need of it. She was building the true account from the outside in, from doorsteps and tally sticks and the marks of honest people, and wherever her figures touched the figures Vosper posted, the gap told the whole tale in daylight. She did the work at night mostly, when the house was down and the passages dark, and only Fenn's breathing kept her company. She kept the fair copies in a false floor she had cut in the bottom of her workbox, under the reels and darning wool, where no housemaid would think to look, and no steward would dare. She wrote by 1 candle with the door bolted, for she had understood from the first that half a case was worse than none, a rumor Vosper could laugh off, but a column of figures he could not. Twice he nearly took her at it. Once he came on her in the north passage at dusk with a candle in her fist, and asked, very softly, what business a cordial maker had so near his office after dark. She was seeing the presses locked for the night, she said, which was true, and he could not gainsay it. But he looked at her a long moment, and she saw he did not care for her being there, and knew why. He had staked everything on there being no one under that roof who watched, or listened, or wrote things down, and here was such a person, and multiplying. So she did her plain work where he could see it, kept her ledger where he could not, and waited. She had a gift for waiting. She had learned it as other girls learned the harp. She could sit a man out the way she had, sat out the great gray dog on his chain, offering him nothing to push against, until the only thing left for the truth to do was walk up and lay its head in her hand. It was the dowager who made her standing plain, after the fashion of very old women, which is to do the thing first and tell the world of it after. One afternoon in the thaw, Sorel was called to the south room and found a flat box open on the table, and inside it, on rubbed velvet, a ring of keys, a dozen or more, iron and brass worn bright at the wards, with 100 years of turning. The plate cupboard, the linen room, the cellars, the stores, the still room, the muniment chest. She knew them the instant she saw them, for a girl raised to run a house knows a housekeeper's ring the way a fisherman knows his nets. They hung on a hook by the still room since before either of my grandsons was thought of, Almira said. When Mrs. Aldrich died, Vosper took them down and locked them in his office, and told my grandson it was for safekeeping, and my grandson was too far under to hear the lie in it. But I have got them back, never mind how. I am too old to be asked how. And they are yours now on your own belt, where the whole house may see them and know whose hand turns the locks. When someone tries to take them off you, and he will try, you will not give them up. Your Grace, I am a hired woman. You have run this house since the thaw, on my word and your own 2 hands, and it is time the fact was worn where the eye can find it. Take them. Sorrel took them. They were heavier than she had thought a thing so small could be. She wore them at her waist from that hour, and their small iron music went before her down every passage of Ravenglass, until week upon week it became the sound the house made, remembering how a house is meant to run. The first evening she wore them into the library, the Duke's eye went to them and stayed, and something crossed his face she could not read. Grief, perhaps, or the memory of another woman who had once carried them, or the first faint stir of a thing he had no name for yet. My grandmother gave you those, he said. It was not a question. She did, your grace. I told her the county would talk. Let it talk. He weighed the shut book in his hands. My brother used to tell me a house is not held together by the master's signature, that it wants somebody's hand on the actual doors, someone who knows what stands behind each of them. I thought it sentiment. I have learned this year what it costs when no one does. I have set my name, this year and last, to a great deal I never once read to the foot of. Sorrel's heart went still, for it was the nearest he had yet come to the very thing she was building, figure by figure in the false floor of her workbox. Then, perhaps, she said carefully, your grace had better begin reading again. He looked at her across the low fire, and for a moment she thought he would ask her outright what she knew. But he was not ready for it, and neither, if she was honest, was she. The moment passed, the fire settled, and they sat on in the shared country of the library, each holding one corner of the same truth, and neither yet willing to spread it out on the table between them. For without either of them setting out to do it, she and the Duke had come to know one another. It had begun there, in the library, the one room he still used. She had found him of an evening, not reading, only sitting with a shut book on his knee and the fire low. The first time she made to go. Stay and find her book, he said. You are no trouble to me. So she stayed, and after that, by nobody's arrangement she came. Most evenings, and he was there, and the library grew into a country, the two of them held between them. He was, she found, exactly the man his grandmother had named, not cold, but far down and going further. Under the shut face was a dry, careful humor and a great store of tenderness gone to waste, for want of anywhere to spend it, like a walled garden left to the nettles because the one who loved it is no longer there to walk in it. The hours between them changed, though neither would have said so aloud. He took to keeping back the foolish half of the newspaper to read her its absurdities and hear her laugh, which she did seldom, and he found he worked for. She took to bringing her mending down to the fire, to have a reason to stay. Neither named the thing that was growing. Both felt it, and Sorrel lay awake more than one night after, cross with herself. A woman who means to vanish in 2 years has no business learning the particular quiet of one man's company, and less business still leaving him, every silent day believing a lie that was eating his house from the inside. He spoke of his brother only once. It was late, the fire nearly out, and he did not look at her while he said it. We quarreled at supper, the last night I had him. I have never been able to call back what it was over. Nothing. A hound, a wager, a girl he was sweet on. I told him he was a fool who would die in a ditch, and he laughed and got up and went out into the dark, and the tide was making, and I let him go. Because I was too proud to follow a man I had just called a fool. He turned the book over in his hands. They brought him up off the rocks in the morning, and the county decided I had done it, and I have never troubled to argue, because, in the one way that counts, they have it right. I sent my brother out to that water with a hard word in his ears, and I have not been able to look since at a single thing his hands ever touched. Sorrel did not tell him she was sorry. She had learned, at his grandmother's knee, and a long way before it, that sorrow has no use for a stranger's tidy condolence. She said instead, a hard word at a supper table does not raise a tide. You have carried 5 years of a death, the sea dealt, not you, and carried it for no worse crime than being proud one evening of your life. Most men are proud most evenings. The sea lets nearly all of them be. He looked at her across the embers a long time. You carry a great deal yourself, he said. Do not imagine I have not watched you do it. The dog, the chimney, the tenants, my grandmother's keys at your waist that she had no more right to give you than the crown of England. Why? What is a shunned man's rotting house to a woman who could be over the moor and free of it by morning? It was the question she could not answer wholly without answering all of it. So she gave him something true that was not the whole truth. Because it is a wicked thing to let a house die of neglect while good people stand about it wringing their hands, she said. I cannot abide waste your grace. It is the worst of my faults. I would set a battlefield to rights, and beg the fallen's pardon for the untidiness." Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was very nearly a smile. "I begin to think you would," he said. "She might have let it rest there." She meant to, but she had the muniment key on her ring now, and 3 nights on, alone in the cold record room with her candle, she opened the great chest after the old leases, and found beneath them a bundle of a young man's papers that no hand had touched in 5 years. Cassian Ash's writing, his own book of the estate, kept in the last months of his life. She read it standing, and the candle guttered, and the cold came up through the floor into her, because the last of it was not the careless scrawl of a boy who could not keep 6pence. It was patient and watchful, a young man checking his steward's figures against the tenant's own, a shilling here, a phantom repair there, the very labor she had bent over all that spring. And on the final page, driven hard and angry into the paper, 8 days before the sea took him, her drowned forerunner had written, "Vosper cannot answer for £1,100 these 2 years. I will have it out of him Friday, or have him before the bench. He knows that I know." Cassian had not walked down to the cove that night quarreling over a hound. He had walked down knowing. Sorrel put the papers back exactly as they had lain, and told no one, not even the dowager, not yet. A suspicion of theft was heavy to carry alone. A suspicion of murder was heavier than she dared set down before she could prove every ounce of it. But the floor had shifted under her, and she had begun to be frightened in a wholly new way. And it was just then, as the year turned toward its warmth, that the sharper of her enemies came up the moor road. Mrs. Verena Cardew was the Duke's cousin, his father's only sister's only child, born to a great deal more than she now had. Her husband had died and left her a widow's pittance that thinned every quarter. Since Cassian drowned, she had come to Ravenglass oftener and stayed longer, with a design-owned sister to Hollis Crome's, though the two had never met. If she could not be mistress of the house as its duchess, and Corwin had never looked at his cousin, so she would be its mistress from behind the door, the devoted kinswoman who had stood by him when all the world crossed the street. She had thrown in with Vosper 3 years since, or he with her. It came to the same. He saw her small debts cleared out of the estate's quiet leak, and she smoothed his road to the master. And it was Verena who, in the raw first weeks, breathed the word murder into the county's ear. For a man, the whole world believes a killer has one friend left, and she meant to be that friend to the end of her days. She saw, the day she came, everything the rest had grown used to. The shortened table, the swept chimney, the mended tenants, the dog at heel, the small brown woman with a housekeeper's keys at her waist. Something had put down roots while their backs were turned, and Verena was cleverer than Vosper. She did not smile and threaten. She watched. Within a week she had seen what the steward, for all his fear, never had. That the still-room woman was not merely able, but hidden. "Wren," she said one afternoon over the dowager's tea, tasting the name as though she doubted it would keep. "From where, I wonder? There are Wrens in the Fen country." "Are you a Fen Wren, Miss Wren?" "None so respectable, ma'am. My father was a plain country surgeon, was he? And left you nothing at all, poor creature. So you must carry another woman's linen at the world's edge." The smile did not reach so far up as the eyes. How very wearing, to be born a step above your fortune and a step below your betters. "I watch people, Miss Wren. It is the one thing I was ever taught to do. Well, my cousin thinks me idle, but I watch." "Then you have the advantage of me, ma'am," Sorrel said, "for I never learned to watch anything but a stew-pot and a sickbed." From the depth of her chair the dowager made a sound that, in a less exalted person, would have been a snort. But that night Mrs. Cardew wrote 3 letters. Among the wreck of her connections, she had a cousin married to an attorney in the eastern counties, and set her to asking, in the mild, roundabout way of country lawyers, whether anyone recalled the surgeon's daughter of about 22, a Miss Frayne perhaps, gone from her people the autumn before last. Such a question takes 6 weeks to come home. It would come home, as these things do, in the very middle of everything else. And Sorrel went on building her case, all unknowing, with 2 ropes now drawing slowly tight about her, and no way to tell which would pull fast first. It moved quickly at the last, the way slow things do once they finally move. Mrs. Say. Cardew's answer came home on a bright morning in the first of the summer, and she had not yet found her moment to use it when a traveling chaise nobody at Ravenglass had sent for came grinding up the drive, for Hollis Crome had run his ward to earth himself, at last, by the slow, patient road. A servant's letter carried home, a word let fall in a coaching inn, a name matched to a name. He had come to fetch his runaway, and her £3,000, back to the son who was owed them both. Sorrel was in the forecourt with a basket of cut roses for the dowager's table when the chaise stopped. She saw the door swing open. She saw the fat, familiar hand on the frame, the plum coat, the face that had loomed over her. Across a cold parlor at Michaelmas, the basket went out of her hands, and the roses spilled all across the gravel. "So," said Hollis Crome with vast satisfaction, "so there you are at last. Do you know what you have cost me in horses, girl, chasing you the length of England? Fetch your box. You are going home to be married, as your poor father wished, and we will hear no more nonsense about it." And that, of all the mornings, was when the Duke of Wintermarch came down his own front steps. He had heard the wheels. A strange carriage in his forecourt was still faintly his affair. He came down into the thick of it, his cousin arriving from the garden with a letter and a rising triumph in her face, his steward soft as a cat in the doorway, a stout stranger in plum bellowing at his grandmother's companion, and the companion herself white and still in a wreck of scattered roses. "What?" said the Duke, in the low voice that had once quieted a whole inn-yard, "is the meaning of this?" It came out all at once, and badly, the way such things come. Hollis Crome, delighted to find a duke to appeal to, laid the whole of it before him in his own colors. His ward, his late brother-in-law's girl, an heiress of £3,000 in his faithful keeping, promised these 2 years to his son, bolted from her duty like a thief in the night to hide in service under a made-up name, and his grace, all unknowing, sheltering a sly, ungrateful, fortune-concealing creature who had lied her way beneath his roof. And Mrs. Cardew stepped forward with her letter, and sweetly confirmed every word of it. "It is quite true, cousin. I made a few enquiries. For the household's protection, you understand. She is exactly what this gentleman says, a surgeon's daughter, with £3,000 of her own, playing the pauper in your still-room. And one does ask oneself, why, a woman who will hide a fortune to scrub linen, what else has she to hide? Whose books, for instance, has she been so very busy copying out these 3 months, by candle, behind a bolted door?" The letter trembled prettily in her fingers. "I think only of your safety, cousin, and your grandmother's." Every face in the forecourt turned to Sorrel. She looked at the Duke, and he was looking at her precisely as that first wet night at the inn, shut, drawing back, a door swinging quietly to. She watched him decide she had lied to him, the one creature in 5 years who had met his eyes without fear, and she too, it seemed, a false name, a hidden fortune, a secret reason for copying his accounts, exactly as his cousin said. She saw the library close behind his face, and, standing there in the ruin of the roses, Sorrel found to her own great surprise that the fear had gone clean out of her. It is a strange thing to dread a moment 2 years together, then stand inside it and find the dread simply gone. She had spent her whole life unseen to keep herself safe. And here was safety ending, in a gravel yard, in front of them all, and the sky had not come down. There was only the truth left, and the truth at least was plain. "Every word this gentleman has spoken is true," she said. Her voice went out clear and steady across the gravel. "My name is Sorrel Frayne. My father left me £3,000 in trust and named this gentleman his brother by marriage to keep it. I ran from his house because he would have me wed his son, so the money should never leave his hands, where a great deal of it has already gone. The account he keeps, as my trustee, will show that to any honest man who asks. I came here under a false name because I was afraid and hid my fortune, not to cheat this house, but to live out of the reach of a man who would have spent me and it together." She turned from Crome to the Duke, and now she saw no one else in the yard. "And yes, your grace, I have copied your accounts. Your cousin has that part right. I have copied them 3 months, and they are upstairs, fair and whole. The true rents against the rents your steward posts, the tenants' marks against the sums they have been squeezed of, the £40 you paid last autumn for a north wing roof that still lets the rain through. The mending of a cottage charged 2 winters back while the rain fell on a sick child's bed, not a week past. I did not bring it sooner because I was a coward, and because I had a fortune of my own to hide, and told myself, your house was no concern of mine." Her voice did not shake. "I was wrong in every part of that but the last. It is no concern of mine. I have made it my concern. You are being robbed, sir, to the roots, and for years together by the man standing soft-footed in your own doorway. And the robbery is not the worst of what he has done." For the space of 1 breath, nobody moved. Then Vosper laughed. A soft, round, pleasant laugh. It was the wrong thing, and he knew it the instant it left him. A man does not laugh at a true account. Sorrel kept her eyes on the Duke. "5 years ago, your brother kept his own book of this estate," she said. "It lies in the muniment chest in his own hand, where you have never been able to bring yourself to look. In his last weeks, Cassian was doing the very thing I have done this spring, setting Vosper's figures against the tenants. On the last page, 8 days before he drowned, he wrote that his steward could not account for £1,100, and that he meant to have it out of him that Friday, or have him before the magistrate. She let the yard hear it fall. Your brother did not walk down to the cove that night quarreling with you, your grace. He walked down a marked man, and the one soul in all this country with a reason to want him silenced was not his brother. It was the man who has let you wear the blame for it these 5 years, because a duke, the whole county believes a murderer is a duke, too shamed and too shut away, ever to open his dead brother's books. The Duke of Wintermarch was no longer looking at her as at a door swinging shut. He was looking at her the way a drowning man looks at a thrown rope. "Show me the whole of it," he said. They did it in the library, and it took what was left of that day, and half the night. Sorrel fetched down her fair copies, 3 months of them, built a shilling at a time. Halden brought the tradesmen in their Sunday coats, uneasy in the great shunned house, and one by one they laid their own books open beside hers, and swore to the figures, the butcher, the chandler, the corn factor, the Rackmouth mason who had never set a slate on any north wing roof because no one had ever paid him to. Joy brought the tenants up over the moor, Alice Kemp among them, and they made their marks again by candlelight under the Duke's own eye. Then the Duke opened the clean book, and the thumbed one side by side turned the pages in a long silence, and understood it all in about 4 minutes, for he was, as his grandmother always said, no fool, only a man whom grief had kept a long time from looking. But it was old Jory who set the last stone in the wall. Taciturn Jory, 50 years about the Ravenglass stables, who had touched his cap to Sorrel ever since she gentled his dead master's dog, stood turning his hat and said the thing he had carried like a hot coal for 5 years and never dared speak, because Vosper paid the wages and was not to be crossed, that on the night Lord Cassian drowned. He had seen the steward go down the cliff path after him, a good hour behind, with a lantern hooded dark, and had said nothing, and been sick with it ever since. The Duke laid his open hand flat on his brother's book, on the 5 years he had refused to lift the cover of, and when at last he spoke, it was not to Vosper at all. He kept it fair, he said, To no one, to the shut north wing, to the brother he had buried under a lie of his own keeping. He was not careless. He was right, and I called him a fool at my own table, and let a whole county call me his murderer, sooner than read one page of his hand. His voice did not rise. It went the other way, down to the floor of him. You will be out of my house tonight, Vosper. You will stand before the Rachmouth bench by noon tomorrow, and every figure this lady has taken will go with you, and Jory's word and my brother's book. What you have not already stolen past, recovering, you will give back. What you cannot, you will answer for. The theft, the roof over a sick child, and a young man 5 years cold on the shingle, Halden. See him off the place, and stand over him while he packs. Vosper went. There was, in the end, nothing else left for him to do. At the library door he turned once, and every soft thing had gone out of his face, and he looked at Sorrel with a hatred that had lost its smile entirely. You could not keep to your still room, he said. No, Sorrel agreed. It was never one of my gifts. Good night, Mr. Vosper. When he had gone, the room was very quiet. The Duke stood a long while with his hand still on his brother's book, as though he could not yet make himself lift it away. Sorrel gathered her fair copies from the table, page by page, 3 months' work, and for once in her life did not go hunting after the right thing to say. Some silences are better left whole. It was the Duke who broke this one. You knew, he said. For weeks you carried baskets to my tenants and mended my linen and sat with my grandmother, and said not a word of it to me. Why? If you knew, in the winter you might have come to me then. In the winter you would not have believed me, she said. A grieving man does not want a stranger walking in to tell him his brother's house is being emptied, and his brother's death was murder. He wants to be let alone with it. So I did not bring you a suspicion. I waited until I could bring you a thing you could not refuse to see. She squared the last page onto the pile. And there was my own reason, too, which you heard, shouted across your forecourt this morning, and which does me no credit. A woman who lets herself be noticed lets herself be found, so I chose to be safe rather than useful, as long as I could bear to. I am not proud of it. No, the Duke said slowly. But you did not choose it in the end. In the end you were seen and you spoke, and you might have kept your head down and your money hidden a good while yet, had you not. He was looking at her as though he had never before seen her plainly, which he thought was very likely the truth. My brother would have liked you. He had no patience with people who kept their heads down. A pause. I have not thanked you. I hardly know how for a thing this size. But I thank you. It was a poor handful of words, and out of that, shut and guarded man, they were worth a great deal more than their number. That left Mrs. Cardew. She had sat very still all through the long reckoning, the letter crushed to a rag in her lap, watching the machine she had helped to build come to pieces plank by plank. And when Jory spoke of the hooded lantern on the cliff path, something moved in her hard, bright face that Sorrel would not soon forget, for whatever bargain she had struck with her own conscience over the money and the slander, she had never let herself believe the accident which widowed a house and unmoored a Duke had been no accident at all. She had whispered murder to bind Corwin to her. She had not understood, until that hour, that she had been the true murderer's cover all along. When Vosper was gone she rose, and she was still handsome and still straight-backed, and she made her last throw with the nerve of a gambler staking the rent. You will make a great show of me now, I suppose, she said to the Duke. Your devoted cousin who had her little debts paid through your steward. Oh, I knew where the money came from. A woman as poor as I am always knows to the farthing where her money comes from. Her voice was bright and brittle as struck glass. You will turn me out with the rest. Out to what, cousin? 100 a year and a widow's cap? I married where I was told at 19, and buried him at 24, and got nothing for it but the freedom to be poor among people who were once my equals. You have never in your life not known where your next night's sleep would come from. She was shaking now, though her chin stayed up. She hid 3,000 pounds to be quit of a fat man's son. I would have hidden it to be quit of the whole grinding performance. Do not look at me as though I were a monster. I am only frightened. I have been frightened 15 years. It is a wearing thing, cousin. You have no notion how wearing it is. And there it was, the plain human fear beneath the hard, bright shell, turned out at last into the light. The Duke's face had set hard as the forecourt again, and he opened his mouth, and Sorrel knew he was about to be just, and that justice would be the finish of Verena Cardew. Turned out disgraced, 100 a year, the county, to pick her over at its leisure. Your Grace, Sorrel said. May I? He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Sorrel crossed the room and stood before the frightened, upright, spiteful woman who had done her level best to ruin her that morning. She did not gloat. She had worked out long ago that a triumph paraded is the very thing your enemy is braced to meet, and she had never yet handed an enemy the thing they expected. You settled your debts through the estate, she said quietly. That is theft, and you know it is, and so does his Grace, and you slandered an innocent man 5 years to keep yourself of use to him, which is colder than theft. But you did not falsify the rents. You did not squeeze a widow of a shilling at the term. You did not carry a hooded lantern down a cliff path in the dark. That was Vosper's hand, not yours. You watched and profited and held your tongue. The very sin I was committing myself until this morning. I am ill-placed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes. Ra! There is a cottage at the edge of the park, the old dower house. It stands empty, and it is dry, and it is sound. A woman might live in it decently on 100 a year, neither serve nor serving, and stop being quite so tired. If His Grace is willing, you would owe it to no one, least of all to me. But I think you have been frightened long enough, and I have lately learned that a house which has just turned out one thief does no good by making a beggar of a frightened woman on the same afternoon. Verena stared at her. Whatever she had steeled herself to meet, it had not been this, and it undid her worse than any justice could have. Why? She said. It was not a graceful question. It was torn out of her. Because I know exactly how heavy that particular tiredness is, Sorrel said. Good night, Mrs. Cardew. The Duke of Wintermarch looked at his grandmother's companion across the wreck of his own long blindness, and something in his face that had been shut since the spring his brother died came quietly and painfully open. It was the dowager who ordered the ball, in the way of very old women. Settle it first, tell the household after. There had been a summer ball at Ravenglass once, every year of Cassian's short life. The one night the great rooms were thrown wide and the whole district came up the drive, and the gallery blazed end to end. There had been none in 5 years. But the truth was out now. The true thief, bound for the assizes, and the story the county had told itself about the Black Duke of Wintermarch was coming apart in every drawing-room from the border to the sea, the way such stories do once the first honest man says the first honest word aloud. So the dowager announced from the depth of her chair that there would be a ball again this summer. The house had begun to breathe, and a house that has begun to breathe again ought to be let dance. You will open the rooms, she told Sorrel. All of it, the linen, the plate, the supper, the 50 wax candles down the gallery that my grandson will groan at the cost of and pay for gladly. You have run this house since the thaw girl, whatever anyone chose to call you. It is time the county saw whose house it is, and saw its master stand up straight in his own gallery, for the first time since they hanged him in their small minds. So Sorrel opened the great rooms. The covers were struck, the shutters folded back, 5 years of dust carried out in pails. She filled the gallery with the first roses and 50 candles of good wax that would not smoke, for she had scoured the sconces herself. And on the night, with the dowager's blessing, she wore a gown of soft dove-gray, plain, unremarkable, the very color a ballroom looks straight past. She wanted nothing more. She had not come to Ravenglass to be looked at. She was looked at all the same. She was standing at the head of the gallery near midnight, seeing the supper carried in and the candles trimmed, forgetful of herself, when the Duke crossed the whole length of the crowded room to reach her. The county saw him do it, which was rather the point, though she did not understand that until afterward. He crossed his brother's ballroom, full of every family that had shunned him 5 years, and stopped before his grandmother's brown-haired companion in her borrowed gray, and bowed as a man bows to a woman he means the whole county to remark, and said, so a good many heard him, "Miss Frayne, will you stand up with me?" She had not danced in 2 years. Her feet remembered before the rest of her did, and halfway down the set, under cover of the music, the Duke spoke low. "They will speak of nothing else for a 12-month. They will, your grace. You have ruined me past repair. A companion cannot dance with a duke and stay a companion." "No," he agreed, "she cannot. I have given a great deal of thought these 3 weeks to what she might become instead." He turned her under his arm, exact as a clock. "My grandmother holds that she should become Duchess of Wintermarch, and presses the case with some force. She says the house cannot spare you, nor can she, and that I am a great fool who wanted a whole season to see what a half-drowned dog and an old woman both saw in an afternoon." Sorrel kept her feet in the figure and her voice light, because she knew that if she once let it go heavy, it would break. "And what is the Duke's own view?" "Sir," leaving his grandmother to one side, the music turned them. He looked down at her, and the shut face was open now, all the way, awake and unguarded and afraid. A man who had learned that spring how much a house can lose while its master declines to look. "The Duke has no view to press on you," he said. "He has lately learned his lesson about setting his name to things put in front of him, and he will put nothing in front of you at all." He stopped, in the middle of the set, in front of the whole room which was not done, and set the gallery whispering behind its fans. "I will not offer you a marriage of convenience, Sorrel. You have £3,000 of your own coming, and in 2 years you will be free of every hand that ever tried to spend you or your money. That is the whole reason I am asking, not because the house wants a mistress, it has one, and has had one since the thaw, but because I should like to spend the rest of my life being looked at by the one person in England who was never afraid of me." His voice went right down to the bone. "Marry me for myself because you choose it, or do not, and stay, and run the house I could not, and I will never trouble you with the question again. Everything from here is yours to answer." The whole gallery had gone still. 50 candles, the roses already going over in the warm room, 5 years of shut doors standing open to the summer night. Sorrel looked up at him. She thought of the wet-in yard, the kiss she had stolen to save her own skin, the 2 years she had meant to spend as nobody at all. Safe was a small, cold word. She had been safe the whole of her life. Not once until this spring had she been seen. "Huh, Corwin!" she said. She had never used his name. The gallery heard her use it. He heard her use it, and something crossed his face worth more than £3,000, and the whole grey house besides. "That is a yes," she said. "Should the Duke require it spoken aloud?" "I have grown very tired of holding my tongue. Yes, I will marry you for yourself, because I choose it." She could not help it. The almost smile had found its way onto her own mouth now. "On one condition, your grace. Name it." "Alice Kemp's roof is mended before the harvest properly, by the man who is actually paid to do it." The Duke of Wintermarch laughed. It was a sound the county had not heard from him in 5 years, and it carried the length of the bright gallery, and by the door the dowager set down her glass and permitted herself, at 81, to look one moment wholly satisfied. By high summer, sorrel Frayne ran the whole house, and there was no one left who cared to call it anything but what it was. The roof over the north wing was mended by the Rackmouth mason, paid the £40 it truly cost, and not a farthing over. The rents came in fair now, into one honest book kept in Sorrel's own hand, with no thumb twin beside it in the dark. What Vosper had squeezed from the tenants over 5 years was reckoned to the last shilling, and given back cottage by cottage, and where he could not restore it, little enough was found on him. The Duke made it good from his own purse, and counted it cheaply bought. Vosper answered to the Rachmouth bench, and then to the assizes, for the theft, and for a hooded lantern on a cliff path, and the county that had spent 5 years murmuring one man's name over its teacups found it had been murmuring the wrong one, and said so, loudly, as though it had known from the first. His fall gave Sorrel no pleasure, only the sober quiet of a thing set straight. Hollis Crome went back to the fen country with his post horses unpaid, for his trustee's account would not, once an honest man asked to see it, bear the looking at. And when Sorrel turned 25, 2 springs after she first came up the moor road running, the £3,000 fell into her own hands, at last, clear and free. She gave the whole of it into the estate. For the tenants' cottages it was hers to give, and a thing given freely is the one wealth no man living can take back out of your hands. Mrs. Cardew lived in the dower cottage at the edge of the park. She did not soften all at once. A woman does not unlearn 15 years of fear in a season, but she came up to the house at Sorrel's asking, and found, being clever, that she had a far better hand for ordering a still room than for watching after other people's missteps. She took it for her own, and the 2 women came, if not to friendship, then to the hard respect of people who both know how wearing it is to be poor among one's equals. They were married quietly in the church at Ravenglass, where Cassian lay, his grave tended now. His name spoken again at last in the daylight by a brother who had finally read his hand. The dowager came up the aisle on her grandson's arm and wept exactly once, and pronounced it the outermost limit of what any sensible woman ought to allow herself. She lived 2 summers more to see the house full and the drive busy, and the county come up it with its hat in its hands, then died in her chair in the south room on a bright autumn morning, her back straight to the last. That was the one grief the summer could not mend. The dead do not come home because the living have learned to be happy, not Cassian from his cove, nor Elmira from her chair, but the great grey dog Fen lay easy at the library hearth. The dead housekeeper's careful labels were kept in a drawer in the young Duchess's own hand, and the Ravenglass ball was given every summer after. So the ones who had gone were not, in the ways that could be managed. On a warm evening at the close of that first summer, the Duke went looking for his wife, and found her where he had half known she would be. In the library, in the chair by the fire, the one great honest account book open across her knee and a single candle lit. She was not reading it. She was only sitting with it, the way a person sits a while with a thing that has finally come right. "You have put the whole house in order," he said from the doorway. "You have cleared my name, mended my roofs, and gentled my brother's dog. There is nothing left in the place to save. What will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" Sorrel looked up at him across the low fire level, and gray-eyed and unafraid. It was the way she had looked at him from the wet gravel in the first hour of the first day when he had told his butler she would be gone inside the week.
"I shall find something,"
she said. "I always do. I cannot abide waste. You know it is the worst of my faults." The almost smile. "Come and sit down. You are drowning in the doorway again." He came and sat. The candle burned. The house breathed around them, honest and full and unafraid, a house that had held its breath a very long time, and had that summer at last been let to loose it. She had come to Ravenglass to disappear. She ended it the most looked-at woman in the county, kissed in a public yard, stared at the length of a whole ballroom, known by name at every cottage door on the moor. And she had found the one thing she had never thought to go looking for in all her careful hidden years, that to be seen, by the one person who would never use it against her, was not the ruin she had spent her whole life running from. It was the only safe place she had ever stood.